Okay. Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome to our first ROC Work weekly webinar series. This has come about from our annual conference that we held a couple of weeks ago in Singapore. It's our revenue optimization conference. This conference is held in 5 cities around the world. So there's Brazil, the US, Europe, Middle East, and Asia Pacific. We had ours at Marina Bay Sands in Singapore on the 9th of June. So in order to get a bit of our great content and sessions out to everybody in the region, we thought we'd do some weekly webinar series and invite some of the speakers back to talk to you, so you can get some interaction with the speakers as well. There's also a series of recordings available. If I can get my little slide to work. Okay, so this is the first one. There's 6 in the series of live webinars with the speakers involved, and then there's 8 conference sessions that you'll be able to just watch the recording of. So if you've registered, you'll be able to see all of those sessions. There's some really good ones actually. So today we'll do a little welcome. I'll do a bit of a HSMAI update, and then we'll hand over to Michael, who's going to talk about beyond the forecast, or an economic update on Asia Pacific. And then Tracy will give us a bit of a short-term update on demand data around Southeast Asia and a bit broader. And then I spelt discussion incorrectly, but we can have a discussion. Sorry about that. We can have a discussion afterwards. So HSMAI, for the new people, is Hospitality Sales and Marketing Association International. As I said before, there's 4 regions around the world. There's also Brazil now. There is, I think, about 7,000 members over 41 chapters around the world. We focus on individuals who work in sales, marketing, and revenue management, and the leadership of those commercial areas. We have content and events for everything from getting ready to work in one of those departments, to upskilling, to getting certified, to the leaders and the C-level people. So it's quite a broad range of people that we engage with. In the Asia Pacific, we do events in 8 markets, and the new market this year is India and Maldives. We'll be doing some face-to-face things in there later in the year. There's lots of events there, so I'll skip that one because you probably can't read it very well. But the main things that are coming up soon are there's some online masterclasses which will run from the masterclasses we did at the revenue conference. So there's 3 of those on commercial acumen, on using your content, and on total revenue forecasting. We're just trying to work out the dates that we can get the trainers to agree on and get those out there, but they'll be out pretty soon, hopefully in the next week. And then in Phuket in September, from the 13th to 15th of September, on the 13th, we'll do a half-day digital sales summit, like conference style summit. And then there'll be 2 days of training workshops on the 14th and 15th, which conveniently is Thursday and Friday, so that if you wanted to stay the weekend in Phuket, you could from wherever you're coming from. And then we have another webinar series in August. Excuse me, I'm isolating from COVID, so I'm sorry if my voice is fading fast. In August, we have a webinar series on the trends for mice, so that'll be interesting, and we're doing that on market-based sessions over 6 sessions. And then in Delhi later in the year, we're also doing a 2-day revenue training workshop. And then for those people who can't come to events, then there's also an academy, and there's 3 certifications in there in revenue management, digital marketing, and business acumen. And there's over 20 online courses and 2 certificate qualifications. So Sorry, if you're looking for that sort of learning, you can find it there. So we're going to start with Michael, but if you want to ask questions, please use the Q&A little button at the bottom of your screen. If you can't see it, if you roll over towards the bottom of your screen, it'll appear, and then you can submit a question. Do that anytime when they're speaking, and when they're finished speaking, then we'll go through the questions. We're going to start with Michael, and he is going to take you over the insights on APAC travel and tourism.
Welcome everybody. Apologies I can't be there in person, but hopefully I will be there in person for the next event. Just checking that you can see my my presentation up on the screen. Can someone confirm that for me, please? Excellent. Okay, so as Heidi said, I'm going to be providing an outlook for travel and tourism in the APAC region. So just briefly, I'll just give a quick overview of our company and what we're about. So Tourism Economics is part of the global umbrella company, Oxford Economics. So our role within the Tourism Economics division is to focus on travel flows, forecasting and economic impact work relating to the tourism industry. So we're made up of more than 25 economists, 25 economists operating out of the US, the UK, Europe, and myself in Australia. And each year we partner with over 500 companies and destinations for their research and their travel economics needs. Our umbrella company, Oxford Economics itself, has over 250 economists and industry experts all over the world. And in terms of what we provide, so we provide data subscription services with forecasts for travel between 180 countries, 300 cities, and we also produce specific air passenger forecasts in conjunction with IATA. We also provide bespoke consulting services, particularly those focused on custom travel forecasts and economic impact analysis relating to the tourism industry. So I guess to start off with, the key point I want to make is that the travel recovery is underway globally. So 2022 is the year where tourism has restarted in earnest. So there's still factors at play that are a drag on the recovery of the travel industry and introduce risks to the outlook. But overall, things have mostly restarted after the disruption of the last 2 years. So this chart here, this shows the number of domestic tourist nights globally in light blue and international tourist nights in dark blue. And what you can see from this is that domestic travel is expected to recover quicker than international. So domestic is expected to recover 2019 volumes this year, but international travel slower, so not until 2025. I should note at this point, these forecasts I'm going to be showing you today are what we put together in late March. So we're currently updating those. We couldn't get them done quite in time for this event. So you can expect to see a few downgrades from what I showed today, but overall, the main story still remains true. So before I dig more into the travel outlook, let's have a look at the global macroeconomic environment because it provides some context and it also helps to inform our forecasts and expectations for tourism. So at the moment, inflation is the key talking point in the global economy. So this graph here shows Oxford Economics forecast for global GDP growth in the red line and inflation in the blue line. And these are the forecasts or the expectations for this year, so 2022. And what this graph shows is how these forecasts have evolved since the middle of last year, so on the far left of the graph, through to more recently on the right of the graph. So what you can see from this is that our expectations for inflation began to increase late last year, and we revised our forecasts higher in accordance. And this happened alongside the recovery of global demand and a squeeze on supply, including labour shortages. But the war in Ukraine this year has added significantly to those inflation expectations. So accordingly, we've revised our expectations for inflation higher consistently throughout the year. And alongside that, expectations for GDP growth have weakened. So we think, as a summary point, an accurate characterization is that uncertainty is high at the moment, as is inflation, and that uncertainty has increased in the past 6 months. But overall, we're hopeful that a global recession will be avoided. Now, energy prices have been one of the key drivers of inflation, as I'm sure you're aware, although there has been a contribution from labour shortages and supply squeezes. So oil prices have spiked this year, although I should point out that our expectations are for these prices to gradually come down into 2023 and 2024. Now, this spiking of oil prices will likely lead to some increase in airfares, and on longer routes in particular, this could deter some travel or some trips. And more broadly speaking, higher inflation could erode income and the expected consumer-led economic recovery. So while I noted that higher costs are most likely to affect travel via airfares, it's probably best to characterize these inflationary pressures as a headwind for travel, especially those longer haul trips. But it's also worth noting that because there's a lot of pent-up demand from 2 years of minimal travel and excess savings among consumers, we'd expect the impact of higher airfares on travel decisions to be smaller than would have been the case during previous inflationary periods. So in other words, the price elasticity of airfares is expected to be lower in the near term than has been the case historically. And this inflationary impact is offset somewhat by excess savings among consumers. So while real disposable incomes have been squeezed by inflation, as you can see from the chart on the left, in the chart on the right, you can see that excess savings among households in advanced economies are actually very high. And these savings essentially provide a buffer of sorts against the impact of inflation on travel spending decisions. So consumers are still expected to lead the recovery globally in economic terms, and this will flow through to travel, but there are risks posed by the increase in inflationary pressures. So now I'll return to the tourism industry specifically. So I've shown at the very beginning that domestic travel is expected to recover more quickly than international travel. But within international travel, we expect travel of different distances or hauls to recover at different paces. For short haul travel, which you can see in this graph in the dark blue bars, is between countries within the same sub-region. So for example, that would be travel within Northeast Asia, so say from Japan to South Korea, or say within Southeast Asia, so between Malaysia and Singapore. So this travel is expected to recover quickest in the near term because this type of travel is cheaper, there's less uncertainty about transport routes, and travel between neighbouring or nearby countries is more familiar. And we expect travellers to prefer closer or more familiar destinations, generally speaking, to begin with after the impact of the pandemic. Medium haul travel is of slightly longer length. So this is between different sub-regions. So for instance, between countries in Southeast Asia and those in, say, Oceania. And long haul travel is between different major regions. So for example, that would be travel between, say, Asia and Europe, or Asia and the Americas. And long haul travel is expected to recover at the slowest pace because of the higher costs and the greater uncertainty around transport for these trips. So the reason why I've shown the breakdown of the different recovery pace depending on the haul or distance of the travel is because the composition of traveller source markets or travel of different distances is a key factor when we look at the recovery for these different destinations. So to start with, it's useful to think about aggregate tourism for destinations. So in other words, combining international and domestic into that aggregate, because this is ultimately a key factor when we think about the health of the tourism industry in a country. So this graph here shows the volumes of visitors relative to 2019 levels. So as you can see, if we think about aggregate visitor numbers or aggregate tourists, visitation is expected to recover more quickly in the Asia Pacific region than is the case globally. So both are expected to recover 2019 volumes next year in 2023, but the Asia Pacific region is expected to recover at a slightly quicker pace than globally. And the key reason for that is that domestic travel, which again is expected to recover more quickly than international, makes up a larger share of total tourism in APAC than is the case globally. So you can see that here from the dark blue bars. So domestic visitors accounted for 79% of all visits in Asia Pacific in 2019, compared to 69% for the world in aggregate. And while the domestic share of visitors has increased pretty much everywhere as a result of the pandemic, the key point is that the domestic share in APAC remains higher than elsewhere. And domestic travel in APAC is also expected to recover more quickly than globally. So this is partly because international travel among APAC residents has taken longer to restart than some other regions, such as, say, Europe or North America. And this is because of tighter restrictions on borders and international travel. So what we've seen is there's been some substitution from international travel to domestic travel among APAC residents. And while that's one of the near-term factors, the strong outlook for domestic travel also over the longer term for APAC reflects relatively strong demographic and economic factors. So basically strong population growth and expectations for an increase in the propensity to travel will drive domestic travel growth in the APAC region. On the flip side though, international arrivals or inbound travel to APAC is expected to recover more slowly than globally in the near term. So for both the Asia Pacific region and the world, the recovery of international visitor volumes to pre-pandemic levels is expected in 2025. But in the lead up to that, it's going to recover more slowly for APAC than the world as a whole. So you see that in 2022 through to 2024. And this is partly because of what I discussed on the last graph. So in the near term, tighter restrictions on international travel among APAC countries means it takes longer to restart that international travel. But if you look further out, so 2025 and also in later years, which I haven't shown here, the pace of recovery for inbound travel for APAC is stronger than globally. So near-term weakness for APAC in terms of international travel, but longer-term strength. And another key reason for why we expect a slower recovery in inbound travel to APAC is that the APAC region relies less on short-haul travel in total than some of the other regions around the world. The short-haul travel here is in the dark blue bars. So if you compare APAC to, say, globally or, say, to Europe and North America, you'll see that Asia Pacific relies less on short-haul travel than these other two major regions. And again, because short-haul travel is expected to recover first, destinations that rely more on this type of travel will also recover first, whereas medium and longer haul travel will take longer. And beyond looking at the region in aggregate, we also want to look at aggregate travel or the aggregate travel outlook across individual countries within APAC. So once again, what you're looking at here is domestic and international visitors combined, so the total of the two. And we're looking at it for 2022 compared to 2019. And the first thing to note here is that nearly every single destination within APAC doesn't recover 2019 visitor volumes in 2022. You can see though that there is significant variation across countries. So Japan, Australia and New Zealand, Indonesia, for instance, up at the top of the graph, have got the strongest outlooks for 2022. But Hong Kong and Singapore, on the other hand, down the bottom, are among those with the weakest near-term outlooks. And it's also worth calling out China here, because although in this graph we have the outlook as being strongest for China, as I said earlier, these forecasts are from late March. So we're currently updating these, and we expect the Chinese outlook will be downgraded quite a bit. Just how much, I'm not sure yet, but it will definitely be downgraded, given it's the Chinese government has maintained the COVID zero approach for longer than we previously expected. So this figure here is not, or it's stronger rather than what is representative of our current thinking. And then if we go forward a couple of years, so say to 2024, you'll see there's less variation across countries, and almost all destinations recover their 2019 visitor volumes. So these countries are ordered based on the recovery expected for 2022. So you can see here the variation in 2024 compared to 2022. So the difference between the near-term outlook and the projection for a few years' time. And a key factor driving this variation across the outlook for different country destinations is the share of domestic travel. So as I said earlier, for APAC as a region, a higher share of domestic travel will drive a quicker near-term recovery in total or aggregate travel than is the case globally. Now, what this scatter plot is showing, it's showing a lot of stuff here, so I'll try and make it as simple as possible. But it's basically showing the relationship between the reliance of individual countries on domestic travel and the anticipated speed of their tourism recovery. So the dark blue markers here show countries or country destinations in APAC in 2022, and the light blue markers show the same destinations in 2024. So basically, the way to interpret this scatter plot is to look for the number of destinations in the top right and the bottom left quadrants. These quadrants are showing a positive relationship between the pace of the recovery in tourism and how important domestic tourism is for that market. So what you see is there's a clear positive relationship between these two factors. So the stronger is the domestic presence, the stronger is the recovery in tourism. And you also see that it's stronger for 2022 compared to 2024. So in other words, in the near term, countries with large domestic markets will see the strongest recoveries on average. That's also the case in later years, so in 2024, but the relationship isn't quite as strong. And this graph points to a similar thing. So what I'm showing here is the recovery of tourism across countries in 2022, which I showed before just in aggregate, but I've broken it up into the inbound or international and the domestic components. So the contribution of each to the recovery in aggregate visitor volumes for each country. So what you can see here is the light blue domestic bars are positive for all destinations, meaning we expect domestic travel to recover 2019 levels for basically all markets in Asia Pacific. Some of these will probably be downgraded, but overall we expect the majority of countries to recover their domestic volumes this year. However, by contrast, international tourism is negative for all countries. So international volumes will not be recovered in 2022. And you can also see the role of each in contributing to the total for each country. So destinations with the weakest outlook, so down the bottom of the graph, such as Hong Kong and Singapore, for instance, their aggregate tourism outlooks are driven very much by international tourism. And these countries rely heavily on inbound visitors. So their recoveries will take longer. But up the top of the graph, countries with a stronger outlook, such as China, Japan, and Australia, have relatively large domestic markets. So overall, they'll see faster recoveries. And by 2024, it's a slightly different story. So some countries that rely heavily on international tourists, such as, say, Singapore, still have relatively weak outlooks. And those with large domestic markets have relatively strong outlook. But there's less of a clear link as what was the case for our 2022 outlook. So the key point is that the role of domestic tourism is still important in later years, but it's less important than, say, in 2022. And this is because by, say, 2024, 2025, inbound or international tourism has had more time to recover. So I've given a summary of the outlook for tourism for different APAC destinations. And I've made the point that the composition of travelers is important. But one area of significant uncertainty I'm going to touch on is the reopening of China to inbound and outbound travel. So unfortunately, we don't have a crystal ball on this reopening, but it's been consistently delayed. So what that has meant is we've had to consistently downgrade our forecasts relating to travel into and out of China. Our current best guess is for restrictions to be seriously or meaningfully eased around October or around that Q3, Q4 kind of period, or that junction between Q3 and Q4. So what this graph shows here is our projections for international air passenger flows for China, which you can see in the red line, the rest of the Asia Pacific region in the dark blue line, and the world in aggregate, excluding China, in the light blue line. So these lines show the volume of passengers compared to 2019 levels. So a figure of 100 is equal to 2019, less than 100 is below 2019 levels. So the key feature of this graph is the gap between China and elsewhere in APAC throughout 2022. So this shows the expected weakness in international travel to and from China for the rest of this year. So as I've said, our expectation for the reopening is we expect it to happen around that Q3, Q4 junction. So most likely, our logic with that is it's most likely going to take place after the Party Congress, because we expect the Chinese authorities will want that to be a success without disruption from any major outbreaks. Previously, our forecast assumed some initial easing ahead of that, but it seemed less likely as time has gone on, and there's still a downside to this outlook we have for China. But overall, what's become clear lately is they're going to have to ease restrictions and end the zero COVID policy at some stage this year. We highly expect that because it's simply too costly to continue, as has become clear with the recent lockdowns. And the impact and uncertainty of China remaining closed is significant given China's key role as a source market for global destinations. So China accounted for 1/4 of inbound visitors and spending to APAC countries in 2019. And Northeast and Southeast Asia were especially reliant on China as a source market. And even if you look beyond APAC, so globally, China had grown to actually be the largest global source market in terms of international spending in 2019, accounting for 12% of all international tourism spending. So globally, destinations are heavily exposed to China and the risks around the disruption to Chinese travel. But the exposure is especially large for APAC as a region. And just to finish off, within APAC, some destinations are very highly exposed to Chinese travelers. So what this graph shows is the countries that depended most highly on China for their inbound visitors in 2019. So these are the countries most likely to benefit from the reopening of the Chinese market, but also those that are the most vulnerable to the risk of China remaining closed. So I've excluded Hong Kong and Macau from here because they share a unique relationship with China. So aside from these two, the destinations most reliant on China, or the 19 destinations most reliant, are all within the APAC region, ranging from South Korea, for whom China accounted for around 1/3 of visitors in 2019, to 10% for New Zealand. And in actual fact, in 2019, the only country in the top 20 outside of APAC in terms of reliance on China was Switzerland. So I'm just going to wrap up now with a quick summary of kind of the, I guess, what we think are the key takeaways for the outlook for tourism. So a tentative recovery for global tourism is underway, and this has been driven by a consumer-led economic recovery. So there's robust pent-up demand after 2 years of limited travel and the build-up of excess savings. However, there are risks posed to the tourism recovery from inflationary pressures, which will erode household income to an extent and may have an impact on airfares and therefore travel decisions. Overall, we expect domestic travel will recover first, followed by short-haul international travel. So this means that the composition of a destination's travellers will be very important in determining the pace of the recovery of their overall tourism industries. When we think about APAC as a region, the overall recovery will be supported by the large domestic market, and inbound tourism will recover more slowly than globally in the near term. But in later years, the inbound outlook looks strong for APAC. And finally, as I just mentioned before, China is a key source of uncertainty, and APAC destinations are heavily exposed to the Chinese market. So there's upside risks from China reopening, but downside risks to China remaining closed. So that's a key source of uncertainty when we think about the outlook and projections for tourism to the region. So I'll leave it there, but thank you everyone for listening, and I'm so pleased that you're able to gather in person after such a long break.
Thank you, Michael.
Hello. Great, thanks, Michael. That was interesting. I didn't actually get to see it at the at the live event because I was running around making sure everything was perfect. So that was interesting. I think I noticed you said the data came from the end of March. So I guess Singapore would have changed a fair bit since they've loosened their restrictions and opened up a lot more. I mean, that's where we all were a couple of weeks ago, and it seems pretty open again. So I guess those numbers will change faster than expected, will they? That you predicted? You're on mute, by the way. Michael, you're You're on mute, I think. Oh, there you
Yeah,
go.
no, sorry about that. So the numbers which we're still finalizing will be a little bit different. One thing I guess to note is that I guess, as I mentioned during the during the presentation, is that the composition of travelers will have quite a big difference, and Singapore kind of still relies very heavily on longer haul travelers. And as does Hong Kong, aside from travelers sourced from China, they still, because they're those big international hubs connecting. Yeah. So and because longer haul travelers are going to take longer to recover because it's more expensive, and because I guess the dollar impact on airfares from the inflation in oil prices we've seen is going to be larger. You'd still expect markets such as Singapore and Hong Kong that rely a lot more on the longer haul markets to recover more slowly than, say, the markets that rely more heavily on travel from neighboring countries and stuff like that. So while an improvement would be expected, say, in the near term, so for 2022, compared to those numbers you saw for Singapore, I think further out, 2025, for instance, or 2024, we probably don't expect at this stage that big of an improvement compared to what we were a few months ago, just because you're still relying very heavily on those long haul travelers, and that's what's going to take longer to come back.
Right, and the fares are more expensive, as I found out. I was going to go to the US for a conference next week, but I said, oh, it's way too expensive.
Yeah, that's right. And the thing with airfares is whereas in the past, that pressure from commodity prices or oil prices might have been absorbed by airlines, they wouldn't pass on as much of the increase to passengers. We think that now it's more likely that they are going to be passing it on, because airlines don't have that buffer, the margins and the built up, because they've obviously had a tough time over the past couple of years, so they don't really have as much scope to absorb that increase. So they need to pass it on more now than what maybe they would have in the past if oil prices went up. So we're definitely expecting some impact on airfares. Yes, indeed. So that's certainly something we expect. Yeah, we definitely expect an impact on airfares, and that will have some impact on traveler decisions. But on the other hand, as I said, there's a lot of pent-up demand to travel as well. So people haven't been able to travel properly, well, for the most part, for the last couple of years. So if it's a matter of, say, there's a certain amount of income that you can spend, and you're having to choose between different products on which to spend it, then, I mean, travel is something that hasn't really been available properly for 2 years, whereas, say, things like retail and some other kind of products and things have been available. So maybe so we're thinking that will provide some support in terms of travel demand, and that people can, that they're starving to travel, they're desperate to travel. So therefore, they're going to choose that first and maybe sacrifice other consumer goods, if they need to make that decision because, their incomes are affected, or, the price of airfares has gone up.
Yeah, especially if you live in one of those small places like Hong Kong or Singapore, because that's why you live there in a way, is because it's so close to travel to all those other places, but you've been locked in for a few years.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. So, I mean, we're using Singapore as a useful example. I mean, the Singapore-Malaysia relationship, that kind of travel we expect to bounce back very quickly, and it would have already come across in the data. In Australia's case, it's Australia and New Zealand. We expect that to bounce back quite quickly. But then, if you're flying from halfway across the world, again, that's more expensive. And there's also, there's still a sense of unease or caution among travelers to go to destinations a long way away from home. So in the first instance, people typically prefer to go to places that are nearby or that are familiar. Those are the broad kind of factors at play, but there's also some country-specific factors as well. So, for instance, while China is obviously located relatively close to a lot of other APAC destinations, then, I mean, the Chinese market is expected to stay closed until around the end of the year. So even though that, so it's not just a matter of distance, there's also some market specific factors at play there. And as well, when travelers are deciding where they go to, they may be more likely to choose places that are perceived to be safe and have good healthcare and have the virus under control. So for instance, even if, say, a country like Australia is a lot further away, if consumers or travelers perceive it to be a safe place to go and, and a healthy place to go, they may still pick that even if it's further away and more expensive. So there's a couple of things going on. There's the broad trends when it comes to distance and cost, and then there's some market specific factors that will vary depending on the country and the source market.
Okay, well, I guess Tracy can give us some more immediate data of what's just been happening and what is happening in the next few months, and see what happens, and then we'll come back, and if anybody wants to ask a question, please pop your question in the Q&A, and we'll ask it after. Tracy's going to spend about 10 minutes giving us some demand data of what's going on right now. So if you want to share your screen now, Tracy. And you're on mute, so oh yeah, you're right now.
Can you say can you see my screen now? Yep.
That's it. You've got the full screen on.
Okay.
Great. Over to you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity again to share the data. My name is Tracy. I'm the Strategy Account Director of Amadeus Hospitality. Amadeus, a travel technology company working very closely with airline, airport, hotel, railway, search engine, travel agency, tour operator, and other travel player to run their operation and improve the travel experience. I just want to name a few of the major airlines that we're working with: Singapore Airline, Malaysia Airline, Japan Airline, AirAsia, Scoot, and many more. With this partnership, we get to access to most comprehensive industry data. Today, I'll be sharing some airline and hotel data that I have put together, and we will also do a quick deep dive on the channel and segment performance, just to understand how the recovery is taking place and highlight the key area that hotels should focus and action in order not to lose out the opportunities. The good news is we have seen positive sign when looked into 2022 data. In fact, since the last week of April, we have seen global air searches already close to 2019 level. And last month, few of the key cities seeing GDS booking already surpassed the level of 2019. This is a weekly airline and hotel net reservation, including all the cancellation from January 2020 pre-pandemic to May 2022 for Asia. The Asia data that I'm showing here does not include Greater China and South Pacific. The blue bar is the airline, and the green bar is the hotel net reservation. When COVID hit in March 2020, there was significant cancellation for airline and hotel reservation. And when we move through each week to the current, we see there's two obvious dip throughout the recovery. The first one is beginning of 2021, when the Delta variant wave, which impacted India the most. The second one is when the outbreak of Omicron variants in late 2021. The strict border restriction also impact the reservation build up, but the reservation number of each destination pick up as soon as the entry and the COVID-19 quarantine rules are lifted. Last month, May 2022, the total airline reservation was 8.3 million, which is at 50% of pre-pandemic level, and the hotel at 2.8 million, which is already at 80% of pre-pandemic level. For the beginning of this year, we have seen strong outward trend for both airline and hotel reservation. Comparing the first week of January to the last week of May, airline net reservation is increased by 158%, and the hotel increased by 79%. This shows how strong the travel is coming back. When we compare the hotel occupancy month on month from 2019 to 2022, 2022 on book occupancy is ahead of last year. And for May this year, the occupancy is close to 2019 level, only shy by 3%. And the rest of the month of 2022 is ahead of last 2 years. And almost every month is more than 50% of 2019 level. Now let's take a look at the scheduled flight into Singapore, into Asia, not Singapore, and see where the flight departing from. Based on the current and next 3 month data, June to September 2022, these are the top origin source country has the most scheduled flight into Asia. And the top 2 are India and Japan. They contribute about 53% among the top 10. When we look further into the origin source market, which is where the departure city of this scheduled flight, there are 35.2% of the flight are departing outside Japan and India. When we compare the two pie chart, we can see that Asia region recovery are mainly driven by domestic and intra-region travel, which is quite aligned with what Michael actually shared just now. And we see data, we already see data show very positive recovery, and with all the strong travel activity happening within Asia, is really exciting for the industry. So what we need to analyze, to strategize, and put necessary action to capture the business opportunity, we actually need to drill down further on the channel mix performance. The book at the hotel, which is a group block, wholesale, crew, and in-house are the base of the hotel business. 60% or more room nights are booked at hotel for the last 2 years and the beginning of this year, mainly because the rooms are reserved for quarantine services. What's interesting in this comparison is the online channel, the OTA and brand.com. OTA contribution is always higher than brand.com for the last 3 years. This year, from January to May, we see brand.com contribution is at the same level at OTA. It represents a shift of 3% from OTA compared to 2019. For the coming months, brand.com contribution are still higher than OTA by 4%, and GDS is increasing. We anticipate OTA and GDS might come back strong when the international travel is back to the norm. Hotels should implement the right online strategy to continue to strike the balance between each channels. Travelers are eager to travel, but they are still concerned about the uncertainty and unforeseen circumstances, so they prefer the flexibility to book and liaise with hotel directly. It's a good time for hotel to take advantage to gain more direct business and acquire loyal guests. When we look into market segment mix, the discount and retail is the main contributor. It contributes at 64%. Good news is negotiated and group sold business is coming back. They contribute about 21% for the coming months. We see May this year close very strong, almost at the 2019 level, and we thought that booking lead time is short, as there are few countries announced the ease of entry requirement only later in April. But there are 46% booking are booked more than 8 days in advance. Hotels need to ensure the right offer to target the advance booking. This group of people willing to book in advance, but the flexible term is also what they are looking for. The data also show that more than 50% of the online booking are booked more than 8 days in advance. And these people might even doing their research way in advance. Targeting and remarketing campaign need to be in place to constantly remind these potential guests about your hotel and not to lose them. Pre-arrival communication is also key, as it is an opportunity to upsell before the guests arrive and entice them to look forward to their stay. The average release date for Asia is about $133 from January to May. We're seeing GDS ADR is higher for coming months as business travelers are booking into higher room type and higher room type with more benefit included. Let's take a look at the coming months occupancy for few key markets in Asia. Singapore and Seoul occupancy is ahead of other key markets in Asia for June and July. We can also see the other market is building up their occupancy for the coming months. All key market occupancy mainly built out by discount and retail segment, then also the negotiated business. Delhi, Manila, Seoul, Singapore, and Tokyo also see some group book for the coming month. So we are seeing group business is coming back. Based on the overall channel mix performance, we see GDS business is building up, but not as 2019 level for Asia. But when I look into weekly booking pace for GDS specific, their market already seeing almost 2019 level for May and June. Example for Jakarta is 102% for first week of June, 2% surplus compared to 2019, which the rebound is quicker than expected as Indonesia only announced the removal of pre-departure COVID tests later on in the mid of May. The week-on-week build up for all the key markets are positive, and we are seeing booking for corporate rate plan is increasing. Since May, we seeing positive result and trend whenever we refresh our airline and hotel data. I believe everyone here see and feeling the significant massive activity with our job and busy planning for our next holidays. The hotel need to quickly to go through the checklist and work on the sales and marketing strategy in different areas to capture the market share as the coming month bookings are with an upward trend. Though we see mainly domestic and intra-region travel, but with GDS showing corporate is coming back, and also with the removal of border restriction, international traveler will come back strong. Personalization approach is essential, as you don't want the potential guests to get lost and forget about your hotel. Booking is building up for longer booking lead time and longer length of stay. I can't emphasize enough for hotel to monitor the data closely. With strong market recovery, data will support you to make informed decisions and work on the right strategies. I hope you find the data useful and it give you a good boost for your next revenue and marketing meetings. And Amadeus data team provide regular update and share the good news and the market insight on LinkedIn and on our website. So you can actually go to our website to get the most updated data, or you can reach out to our teams if you want to get to know more. Thank you very much for today. Thanks, Jackie.
I'll just take my mute off. Thanks, Tracy. That's great. What did I see? I saw one of your slides. I saw the Japan and India is 53%, but you had two graphs next to each other. I'm not sure what that meant.
Which one? This one?
I think still back some.
If you see by key market, is this few slide?
Yeah, I think you had like pie graphs and doesn't matter. The source markets, that's what it was, the source markets.
Okay. Oh, the airline. Okay. I actually anticipated.
Was that the airline ones?
Yes.
Was it? Okay.
Airline
flights, right.
Yes.
Okay, that makes sense. So what's there? You've got the top 10 for the origin source country and the source market.
Yep. Because when we actually see as an overall, like the flight departing from India and from Japan, these are the source country itself. But we really want to know where the flight departing from. Then we will look into the source market. So the city where the flight departing. So if you actually compare the two pie chart, you can see that India, mainly of the flight are departing within India itself. So
what do you mean? A lot of flights, domestic India?
Correct.
Yeah. That's what I'm hearing from our friends in India, that it's still very busy. Domestic is still really busy.
Even if I take a look in terms of most key market in Asia, India, Japan, Indonesia, Bangkok, domestic flight actually contribute more than 80% to the as a source country or source market.
Right.
So this is aligned with what Michael shared. Yes, domestic is the one actually come back very strong, because I think one of the reasons is also people are more comfortable to travel domestically because they are not sure what is the border restriction for a different country. So, but they are eager to travel. So the first one they actually choose to do is do the travel within the same country. Yeah.
So, do you know, and I don't expect you to have it on the top of your head, but do you know what are the big changes in these graphs compared to before the pandemic? I guess India and Japan are not going to be so large, but is that
yes. We see more. We do see international country or source market within this pie chart, but now you can see that all the source market are within Asia. So there's a big difference. Yeah.
So Tracy, so these are flights going to, so these are
like leaving the country, departing from the.
yeah.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So what you're saying is in the past, maybe there would have been in this top 10, there would have been some countries from outside of Asia. So there's a lot of growth within, like from people going from Asia to elsewhere in Asia. So there's a lot of travel happening, within the region. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, that's certainly something we see in our data as well. In Asia Pacific, while there's a lot of growth coming from, say, European markets coming into Asia, and also Asian travelers, high income Asian travelers traveling to Europe, the vast majority of travel in Asia Pacific is still within Asia Pacific. So people going from, say, Asia to Australia or Oceania to Asia and stuff like that. So Asia Pacific is still very self-contained in a sense, obviously exposed to other regions. But if you just look at so the growth is coming from elsewhere, but there's still a lot of, Asia to Asia and Asia within Asia is still very important. Yeah. Yeah,
like you mentioned just now between Singapore and Malaysia, if I drill down based on Singapore, where the flight come on, Kuala Lumpur actually contribute a big pie of it. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, even though Australia is a key market for Asia, but you can see because of the volume of the domestic flight in India and also Japan, the top 10 source market pie chart are still focused within this market itself. I haven't seen Australia here. Maybe it's outside the top 10.
Not even on the map this time.
It's okay. We're not offended. That's okay.
Sorry.
Yeah.
but when you actually drill out into each, if I actually run a pie chart based on like flying into Tokyo, the top 10 origin source market, then we will see a little bit of different pictures. You'll still see some outside Asia country that starts having flight into this market. It's just that the main one is if I run this based on Asia, flight into Asia, departing from this country, Asia city are still the main contributor. Yeah.
And on that topic, that's certainly something that we think about as well when we look at say expectations for where people are going to travel to. It's that the transport infrastructure will be important as well. So that's why that's one of the reasons why some of the longer distance trips might take a bit longer, because there's only one option if you're flying from Australia to the UK or traveling. It's by plane. Whereas, say, traveling within Europe, you can fly, you can drive, you can take the train. So there's still, even though airlines are certainly coming back and welcoming their customers back, there's ultimately more uncertainty the further you have to travel. Whereas if it's just a matter of you can choose to drive or get a train, then you have multiple options. So, and that's why domestic travel is so strong to begin with as well. People don't need to worry about restrictions, about in a lot of cases about COVID tests and stuff like that. So it's the uncertainty that arises from traveling halfway around the world. That means people are going to take a little bit longer to warm up to that again. It'll happen. It'll definitely happen, but it's just taking a little bit longer.
Yeah, and even those most of the Asia countries now, the borders is open, but the different pass and different visa the traveler need to apply. I think some of the country one is still unclear to most of the traveler. That is why they actually start doing research, but they haven't made a decision whether should I travel now or later. Yeah,
that's and that's something I find myself when we're looking into our expectations in our forecast, it can be quite difficult to work out all the different rules in all the different countries. So it's certainly a challenge. So it makes it so that's something the travelers think about as well. But it's just trying to understand all the different things, and even though like you said, for most countries the borders are open, because they opened later than, say, some of the countries in Europe, it just takes longer for things to restart as well. So if you say, it takes more than a day or two for things to restart. So Asia Pacific last year was very different approach to Europe. Europe was like, well, we're open because we can't control things, but can't control the spread of the virus. In Asia Pacific, it was, let's stay closed and stay healthy, and there was a lot of domestic travel happening for that reason. But yeah, because they were keeping borders closed, so because they're opened a bit later, just takes longer for things to restart. So that's partly reflected in what I was showing as well.
Yeah, and I think for a few months everybody's a bit more conservative about what they will do. You know, even when we open back up in Sydney, you're sort of picking places to go that are outside or ventilated, or you know, you're just a bit more conservative about what you do and where you go.
But I do see because we actually analyze data on weekly basis, but what some of the city performance actually surprised us. We didn't expect the rebound is so strong. Like Australia, if you talk about GDS, even just a domestic market, but they already surpassed 2019 level, which is we didn't expect this happen that quick. Like even we see a week 1 week.
So Michael, GDS is largely corporate.
Yeah,
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But even like for Jakarta, is actually to my surprise when I ran that data 2 days ago. Like the first week of June, Jakarta already surpassed 2019 level for June first week GDS business. This is actually all the rebound is stronger than what we actually anticipate. Yeah.
And it's very good to hear that, because that's obviously something we've been asked about a lot, about when will, say, business travel recover compared to leisure travel. So the expectation is certainly for leisure travel to recover first, but there are a lot of people, you know, proclaiming that business travel will never recover. But that's not our view. Our view is that it will. It takes a little bit longer, but you can never replace that face-to-face interaction. And I mean, looking at some events in Australia, like I was in Melbourne recently, and they were saying that that it's been crazy the number of events they've been hosting again, and how much demand there is for those, because people really, you know, people have realized how you can't replace that physical or face-to-face interaction with virtual, with Skype and Zoom and things like that. I mean, it's obviously it's a necessity, but it's still not the same as the face-to-face interaction.
Yeah, no, it's not. And I think it was a real struggle to get the hoteliers out of their offices to come to the conference. But the ones who came were just so excited. Everyone was so pumped up, but it was really exciting, you know, real buzz in the air. So once we get them out, hopefully we'll get back to normal, or get forward to the new normal, whatever you call it.
Yeah, because their big group of people are also followers. When they start hearing people, friend or family or colleague around them start traveling either for leisure or for work, they want to do it also.
They feel safer to do it. Yeah. Well, although I'm probably not a good example, because I went overseas and came back with COVID. So,
but still,
although I think I got it from Brisbane, not from Singapore.
So the lesson is to travel internationally, not domestically. Huh?
The lesson is, don't use Jackie as an example. Okay, well, thank you, Michael and Tracy. Really informative sessions and information we got out of that. For everybody, you can watch the recordings of all the sessions on the Hey Summit platform, which is where you would have registered to get onto this webinar. So that'll be there. Coming up. Oh, sorry, not coming up. Sorry, my slides are around the other way. So these are the replays that we've got from other sessions at ROC. So one was restaurant distribution. This is a good, short but good session from Professor Sherry Kimes. She's from Cornell. If you don't know who she is, she's the sort of global expert on revenue management. So she's just given some short tips on restaurant distribution. We had a panel with expectations from hotel owners. So we had Minor Hotels, JLL, and we had the Ascot there. So that's a really interesting session too. Edward Wright from Amadeus, he did a session on, there's another spelling mistake. I'm sorry, I never make spelling mistakes. I just found another one. I'll blame COVID. He did a session on the innovation in travel around airports and airlines, and it's a really interesting session, so tune into that one if you can. And then Renato from Sky City New Zealand, he did a session on loyalty. So that's a good one too. And then we've got one on transitioning to leaner teams through automation, and that's all about a CDP platform, getting all your data into one platform. And then towards the end of the day, we did a nice lighthearted sort of panel session on automation. So you can join a few of the CCOs from Minor Hotels, World Hotels, Chris Crowley from Giretto, and Puneet Mahindra, who's currently doing his master's in AI. That was an interesting session. So these are all recordings you can get from the same link. And then a really excellent session, as always, from Liz Perkins, who heads up APAC for Hilton, talking about changing the focus from revenue to commercial and her perspective on that. And that's a really interesting one too. So there's plenty to see on this platform. And then next week, 29th of June, same time, same place, Paul from Millennium Hotels will do a session on how the sales role is changing and what's happening now. It's a really good, interesting session. He's going to speak live and he'll be there to take questions, and we'll have some other hoteliers there to create the discussion afterwards. So there's lots happening. Okay, we're up to the top of the hour, so we'll finish off here. And thanks so much for joining in our first session, and hopefully we'll see you next week. Bye, everyone. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Tracy.
Pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Bye.